In the biting cold of the fjord, a shadow sank into the black waters. Desperate hands clutched at nothing as life escaped like the treacherous tide. Torstein Braço-de-Urso, the warrior, watched the body falter beneath the surface. Without thinking, he plunged forward. The current pulled him away, the weight of silence nearly overcoming him. But he grasped the arm of the drowning slave, dragging him to the shore. The choice to save him that morning would forever change Torstein's destiny and that of his entire tribe. What couldn't be foreseen was the price of this mercy. 24 hours earlier, the sun barely touched the icy waters of the fjord as Torstein prepared for the day. At 33, he was a respected warrior of the Skjoldsen clan, known for his strength and ferocity in battle, but also for the heavy silence he carried in his eyes. His routine began before dawn, polishing his war axe and observing the misty horizon that stretched beyond the village. The smell of burnt wood mingled with the damp air, while the wind carried distant echoes of hammers in the forge and the murmur of women preparing bread. Torstein's longhouse stood apart from the others, perched on a small rise overlooking the settlement. Its weathered wooden walls bore the marks of 10 harsh winters, just as his body carried the scars of countless battles. Inside, furs lined the sleeping platform, and weapons hung from the central beam, silent witnesses to his reputation as one of the fiercest warriors of the northern shores. The embers in the central hearth glowed softly, casting long shadows across the packed earth floor as he knelt to stoke them to life. Inside, Torstein felt the weight of shame, a shadow that had followed him since the death of his brother Sigurd last winter. The memory of spilled blood, of a promise of vengeance never fulfilled, corroded his spirit. As he lifted his heavy cloak from its peg, his fingers traced the embroidered edge, his mother's work before the fever had taken her. 3 winters had passed since then, yet the loss felt as fresh as the morning frost. He wondered if he was still worthy of the name Beararm, or if he had become merely a broken man among so many warriors. The village was stirring to life as he emerged from his dwelling. Children darted between buildings, their laughter cutting through the morning mist like bird calls. Women gathered at the central well, drawing water for the day's cooking and washing, their voices a low rhythmic hum. In the smithy, Gorm the blacksmith was already at work, the metallic ring of his hammer punctuating the morning sounds. Torstein nodded to the old man as he passed, receiving a grunt of acknowledgment in return. Harald Skjoldsen's great hall dominated the center of the settlement, its high-peaked roof decorated with carved dragon heads that seemed to watch over the clan with eternal vigilance. Smoke curled from the roof vent, signaling that the chieftain was already awake, perhaps planning the next raid or settling disputes among the clansmen. Torstein averted his gaze from the hall. Since Sigurd's death, his relationship with his adoptive father had grown strained, cold as the winter sea. "Torstein Braço-de-Urso!" The voice cut through his thoughts like a blade. Freya, a shield maiden with arms as strong as any warrior's, approached with purposeful strides. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight braid, and her eyes, blue as summer skies, held a challenge. "Harald asks why you weren't at the council last night. The Westfjord clan sends threats again." Torstein's jaw tightened. "Tell him I was hunting." The lie came easily to his lips. In truth, he had spent the evening alone on the cliffs, watching the sea and remembering his brother's face. Freya's expression softened slightly. "He worries for you, Torstein. We all do."
"Sigurd would not want—" "Do not speak his name," Torstein interrupted, his voice low but sharp as a freshly honed blade. She stepped back, her hand instinctively moving to the knife at her belt. The blood feud will bring only more death, Torstein. The Westfjord men are too many. Then I shall take them one by one, until Odin's hall is full, or until I join my brother there." He turned away, ending the conversation with finality. Freya's sigh followed him like a shadow as he strode toward the shore. The morning was growing colder, a bitter wind sweeping down from the mountains that loomed over the fjord like silent giants. Torstein pulled his fur-lined cloak tighter around his broad shoulders. The worn leather of his boots crunched against the frost-covered ground as he made his way to the water's edge. His breath formed clouds before him, dissipating into the gray sky that promised snow before nightfall. As he walked along the rocky shore of the fjord to check the fishing traps, memories of Sigurd flooded his mind. They had set these same traps together countless times, laughing and competing to see who could catch the most fish. Now Torstein worked alone, the silence broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the shore and the occasional cry of a seabird overhead. The fishing traps were simple wicker baskets, weighted with stones and baited with scraps. Torstein waded into the shallow water, ignoring the biting cold that numbed his feet and ankles. The first trap was empty, as was the second. The third held a single pitiful fish, hardly worth the effort of retrieval. Torstein cursed under his breath. The god seemed determined to test him today. He was about to check the fourth trap when he heard it, a muffled cry, mingled with the sound of agitated water. Torstein straightened, his hand instinctively moving to the axe at his belt. He scanned the fjord, eyes narrowing against the glare of the morning sun on the water's surface. There, perhaps 50 paces out, a figure struggled against the current. Torstein approached cautiously, moving along the shore to get a better view. It was a young slave, pale-skinned, with wide eyes and thin arms that desperately rode against the current. The boy's dark head disappeared beneath the surface, then reappeared moments later, gasping and flailing. Torstein hesitated. Saving a slave was a dangerous act that could bring contempt, punishment, and even the wrath of the clan chief, his own adoptive father, Harald Skjoldsson. Slaves were property, tools for work and trade. If this one belonged to someone in the village, interfering could be seen as theft. If he was a runaway from another clan, helping him could be interpreted as an act of aggression or betrayal. Yet there was something in those pleading eyes that made Torstein act. Perhaps it was the memory of his brother's final moments, gasping for breath as blood filled his lungs from the Westfjord spear. Perhaps it was simple human instinct, the unwillingness to watch another person die when he had the power to prevent it. Without further thought, Torstein dropped his cloak and waded into the icy water. The cold hit him like a physical blow, driving the breath from his lungs. The rocky bottom gave way suddenly, and he found himself swimming, powerful arms cutting through the waves toward the drowning figure. The current was stronger than he had anticipated, pulling him sideways, away from his target. "Hold!" he shouted, though he doubted the slave could hear him over the sound of his own desperate struggles. "Hold fast!" The boy's head slipped beneath the surface again. Torstein dove, the icy water closing over his head, stinging his eyes. In the murky depths he caught a glimpse of a pale form, sinking slowly, arms now limp at its sides. With a powerful kick, Torstein propelled himself downward, reaching out with straining fingers. His hand closed around a thin wrist. He pulled, using all his strength to fight the current that seemed determined to claim them both. His lungs burned for air, his muscles screaming in protest. For a moment he thought they would both die there, in the cold embrace of the fjord. Then his head broke the surface, and he gasped for breath, pulling the slave up beside him. The boy was unconscious, his lips blue, his skin pale as the winter moon. Torstein began to swim toward shore, towing his burden with one arm while fighting the current with the other. By the time his feet found purchase on the rocky bottom, Torstein's strength was nearly spent. He staggered toward the shore, dragging the limp form beside him. Water streamed from his clothes, and his teeth chattered uncontrollably. He collapsed onto the pebbled beach, pulling the slave's body beside him. The boy wasn't breathing. Torstein rolled him onto his stomach and pressed firmly on his back, as he had seen done with drowned fishermen. Water trickled from the slave's mouth, but still he did not breathe. Desperate, Torstein turned him over again and struck his chest with a closed fist. The slave convulsed, coughing violently as water spewed from his mouth and nose. He drew a ragged breath, then another, his eyes fluttering open in confusion and fear. Torstein wrapped his thick cloak around the shivering form, his own body trembling with cold and exertion. In that instant, the warrior felt the weight of his choice, to break with tradition or to sink along with it. He had saved a slave, property, not a person in the eyes of his people. Yet looking at the young man's face, Torstein saw only a fellow human who had nearly died in the merciless waters. "Can you stand?" he asked gruffly, his voice hoarse from the cold and the salt water he had swallowed.
The slave nodded weakly, though his legs buckled when Torstein helped him to his feet. Without a word, the warrior scooped up the thin form, carrying him as one might carry a child. The boy weighed little, his body frail compared to Torstein's battle-hardened frame. As he trudged toward his longhouse, Torstein scanned the shore and the path leading to the village. No one was in sight, a small mercy. He didn't know who this slave belonged to, or why he had been in the fjord, but questions could wait. First, they needed warmth, or the cold would claim them both. The longhouse was dark and cold when they entered, the fire having died down to embers during Torstein's absence. He laid the slave on his sleeping platform, piling furs around the shivering form, then hurried to revive the fire. His fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the kindling, but soon a small flame took hold, growing steadily as he added larger pieces of wood. Only when the fire was crackling merrily, Torstein turned back to his unexpected guest. The slave was conscious but dazed, his dark eyes following Torstein's movements with a mixture of fear and confusion. He was young, perhaps 19 summers, with black hair cut short in the manner of thralls, and skin so pale it seemed almost translucent. "What is your name, boy?" Torstein asked, keeping his voice deliberately gentle. He stripped off his own wet clothes, replacing them with dry ones from a wooden chest. The slave's teeth chattered too violently for him to respond immediately. When he finally spoke, it was in a dialect strange to Torstein's ears, though recognizable as a northern tongue. "Eirik," he managed, the name slipping from blue lips with difficulty. "Eirik," Torstein repeated, testing the name. "I am Torstein, Bear Arm of the Skjoldsen clan. You nearly drowned in our fjord." He moved closer, kneeling beside the platform.
"Where is your master? Who do you belong to?" Fear flashed in Eirik's eyes, and he tried to push himself up, as if to flee. Torstein placed a restraining hand on his shoulder, surprised at the heat radiating from the slave's skin, despite his continued shivering. "Peace, boy. I do not mean to return you if you fled with good reason, but I must know what trouble you bring to my doorstep." Eirik subsided, his strength clearly spent. He muttered something in his strange dialect, then seemed to make an effort to speak more clearly. I ran from the ship. Men from east. They took me from my village 3 moons ago." Torstein frowned. Slave traders from the east occasionally passed through these waters, bringing captives from distant lands to sell in the markets of larger settlements. If Eirik had escaped from such a ship, his former captors might come looking for their lost property. The ship, was it still in the fjord when you jumped? Eirik shook his head weakly. "Past, in night. I waited until land was close, then I swam." He coughed, a painful, racking sound that shook his entire frame. "Cold, so cold." "You're lucky to be alive," Torstein said grimly. "The fjord has claimed stronger men than you." He moved to a small alcove where he kept food supplies, returning with a wooden bowl of dried fish and a horn of ale. The slave needed nourishment if he was to survive the cold that had seeped into his bones. As Torstein soaked pieces of flatbread in fish broth and fed them to Eirik, he noticed a mark on the boy's wrist. A thin scar, like a rune, partially hidden beneath a raw abrasion where a shackle had been. Torstein's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, continuing to feed the slave small bites until some color returned to his face. The rustic wooden cabin that Torstein called home creaked in the rising wind. The fire crackled, casting trembling shadows on the walls, while Torstein rubbed Eirik's chest to expel water from his lungs. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by labored breathing and the crackling of wood. As Eirik slowly regained his strength, Torstein began to see beyond the slave. He saw a man marked by pain, loss, and hope contained in every timid gesture. The warrior found himself studying the young man's face, not handsome by Norse standards, but striking in its own way, with high cheekbones and eyes that held a depth of experience at odds with his youth. "Why did you save me?" Eirik finally asked, his voice stronger now, though still accented with his strange dialect. "I am nothing, a thrall." Torstein was silent for a long moment, considering the question. Why indeed had he risked himself for a slave? It defied all logic, all the values he had been raised with. Slaves died often enough, from cold, from overwork, from beatings. One more should have meant nothing to him. "I don't know," he admitted finally, his voice rough. "Perhaps I am tired of death." Eirik's dark eyes studied him with unexpected intelligence. "You have seen much death." It wasn't a question, but Torstein nodded anyway. "I am a warrior. Death is my trade." "Yet you saved a life today." Eirik's gaze didn't waver. "My life." Something shifted in Torstein's chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. As he fed Eirik bread soaked in fish broth, Torstein felt the change growing within him, a spark of compassion threatening to bring down everything he knew about honor and duty. The slave's gratitude, so simple and direct, touched something long buried beneath layers of grief and rage. The afternoon wore on, the light outside the longhouse fading as storm clouds gathered over the fjord. Torstein added more wood to the fire, and prepared a proper meal, fish stew with onions and herbs, and the last of his bread. They ate in companionable silence, Eirik's strength visibly returning with each spoonful. "You should rest," Torstein said finally, gathering the empty bowls. "Tomorrow we must decide what to do with you." Eirik's face fell, fear returning to his eyes. "Will you sell me again?" Torstein shook his head slowly. "No, but I cannot keep you here either, not without questions being asked." Harald, the chieftain, he does not look kindly on those who interfere with the slave trade. It brings wealth to the clan. Then what will become of me? Eirik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Torstein had no answer. He had acted on impulse, saving a drowning man without thought for the consequences. Now those consequences loomed before him like storm clouds on the horizon. "Sleep," he said finally. "We will find a way." As Eirik drifted into exhausted slumber, Torstein sat by the fire, troubled thoughts churning in his mind. He had saved a runaway slave, an act that could be seen as theft at best, and at worst a challenge to the very foundations of their society. If Harald discovered what he had done... The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters of the longhouse. Torstein wrapped himself in a fur and stretched out on the floor near the fire, his axe within arm's reach. Sleep eluded him for long hours as he pondered the strange turn his life had taken. In the darkest hours of the night, as the storm raged outside, Torstein made his decision. He would help Eirik find safety, whatever the cost. Perhaps in saving this one life, he could begin to atone for his failure to save his brother. Perhaps in defying the cruel traditions that valued some lives above others, he could find a measure of the peace that had eluded him since Sigurd's death. With that resolution, Torstein finally slept, his dreams for once free of blood and vengeance. He woke to the sound of voices outside his longhouse, angry, demanding voices that cut through the early morning stillness like knives. Torstein was on his feet in an instant, signaling Eirik to remain silent. The slave had already awakened, his eyes wide with terror as he pressed himself against the far wall of the dwelling. "Torstein Barearm!" The voice was unmistakable. Gunnar One-Eye, Harald's most trusted warrior and enforcer. "Come out! The chieftain demands your presence!" Torstein's mind raced. How had they discovered Eirik so quickly? Had someone seen them after all? He grabbed his axe and belt, securing them with practiced movements. "Hide," he whispered to Eirik, pointing to the storage pit beneath the sleeping platform. "Whatever happens, do not show yourself until I return." Eirik hesitated, then nodded, slipping silently into the hidden space as Torstein covered it with furs. Taking a deep breath to compose himself, the warrior strode to the door and pushed it open, facing the men outside with a carefully neutral expression. Gunnar stood there, flanked by two younger warriors, their hands resting meaningfully on their weapons. Behind them, a small crowd of villagers had gathered, curiosity and suspicion mingling on their faces. "What is this about, Gunnar?" Torstein asked, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his gut. "Why does Harald summon me with armed men?" Gunnar's single eye narrowed, the scarred socket where the other had been lost in battle years ago, wrinkling with suspicion. "A trading ship from the east reports a slave escaped from them yesterday. They saw him swimming toward our shores. Have you seen any strangers, Torstein?" Relief washed through him. They didn't know about Eirik yet. But the relief was short-lived as Gunnar continued. "The chieftain has ordered a search of all dwellings. The Easterners offer good silver for the return of their property." Torstein's face betrayed nothing, years of controlling his expressions in battle serving him well now. "I have seen no strangers." "But surely Harald doesn't suspect his own men of harboring runaway thralls?" Gunnar's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile on a less scarred face. "The chieftain suspects everyone when silver is at stake. Step aside, Barearm. We will be quick." Torstein knew he had no choice. To refuse would only confirm their suspicions. He stepped back, allowing the 3 men to enter his dwelling. His heart pounded as Gunnar methodically searched the small space, overturning furs, opening chests, peering into shadows. The moment stretched endlessly as Gunnar approached the sleeping platform. Torstein's fingers itched to grasp his axe, to end this threat before it could fully materialize. But such an action would be madness. To attack Harald's men would mean certain death, not just for himself, but for Eirik as well. Gunnar kicked at the platform, tested its solidity, then grunted in satisfaction. "Nothing here," he declared, turning away without noticing the slight gap in the furs where the hidden pit lay. "But keep your eyes open, Torstein. The slave cannot have gone far, not in this weather." Torstein nodded, maintaining his calm facade until the men had left and the crowd dispersed. Only when he was certain they were truly gone did he close the door and slump against it, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "You can come out now," he called softly. "They're gone." Eirik emerged from his hiding place, pale and trembling. "They will return," he said, his voice hollow with certainty. "They always return." "Yes," Torstein agreed grimly, "but by then you will be far from here." The news of the missing slave spread quickly through the village. Whispers of betrayal and disobedience began to erode the confidence of the men. The Eastern traders had offered a generous reward, enough silver to buy 3 good horses or a fine sword. Every eye in the settlement seemed to be watching, searching for signs of the fugitive.
Torstein moved through the village with deliberate normality, stopping to speak with the blacksmith about repairs to his shield, helping to haul in fishing nets, even sharing ale with other warriors in the great hall. All the while his mind worked furiously, planning Eirik's escape. The slave remained hidden in Torstein's longhouse, venturing out only briefly at night to relieve himself, always under Torstein's watchful eye. They spoke in hushed tones, Eirik gradually revealing more of his story, how he had been captured in a raid on his small village far to the east, how he had been separated from his sister and mother, how he had endured months of captivity on the trading ship. "My father was a free man," Eirik told him on the 3rd night, his voice gaining strength as his trust in Torstein grew. "A craftsman who worked with bronze. He taught me his skills before he died of the fever 2 winters ago. I am not meant to be a slave, Torstein. No man is." Torstein found himself agreeing, though such thoughts went against everything he had been raised to believe. In their world, thralls were as much a part of the natural order as the seasons. Some men were born to rule, others to serve. Yet looking at Eirik, seeing the intelligence in his eyes and the skill in his hands as he repaired a torn cloak with neat stitches, Torstein could not reconcile the young man before him with the mindless property that slaves were supposed to be. On the 4th day, disaster struck. Torstein returned from the village to find his longhouse door ajar, a clear sign of unwelcome visitors. Heart-pounding, he rushed inside, fearing the worst. The dwelling had been thoroughly searched, furs thrown aside, chests emptied onto the floor. Of Eirik there was no sign. The hiding place beneath the sleeping platform lay exposed, its contents scattered. Cursing, Torstein spun around and raced back toward the village center. He knew where they would take the slave, to Harald's great hall, where justice, or what passed for it in their clan, was dispensed. His long strides ate up the distance, his mind filled with images of Eirik in chains, being handed back to the Eastern traders, like a lost sheep returned to its flock. The great hall was crowded when Torstein burst through the doors.
A hush fell over the assembled villagers as all eyes turned to him. At the far end, seated on his high chair carved with ravens and wolves, sat Harald Skjoldsson, his grey hair pulled back in a tight knot, his cold blue eyes fixed on his adoptive son with undisguised disappointment. Before him, on his knees with hands bound behind his back, knelt Eirik. The slave's face was bruised, blood trickling from a split lip, but his eyes met Torstein's with a mixture of fear and something else, perhaps hope, perhaps forgiveness. "So," Harald's voice cut through the silence like a blade through flesh, "the bear arm returns to his den, only to find his secret discovered." The chieftain's voice was deceptively soft, all the more dangerous for its restraint. "Explain yourself, Torstein. Explain why you harbored this runaway, this thief of another man's property." Torstein stepped forward, aware of the warriors flanking Harald, their hands on their weapons. Gunnar One-Eye stood among them, his scarred face twisted in a triumphant smirk. The entire clan was watching, judging, waiting to see how the chieftain would handle this betrayal by his own adoptive son. "I found him drowning in the fjord," Torstein said. "I pulled him from the water. Would you have had me let him die?" Harald's eyes narrowed. "You should have brought him to me immediately, not hidden him like a guilty secret. The Eastern traders offer 20 pieces of silver for his return, wealth that would benefit the entire clan."
"He is a man, not a sack of grain to be traded," Torstein replied, anger beginning to seep into his voice. "He has skills, knowledge. He was free once, before raiders took him from his home." A murmur ran through the crowd at these words, some in agreement, others in outrage at the challenge to established order. Harald silenced them with a raised hand. "The law is clear," the chieftain said coldly. "A slave is property. To steal another man's property is a crime punishable by exile or death. You have brought shame upon our clan, Torstein, and upon me, who raised you as my own after your father fell in battle." The mention of his birth father sent a spike of pain through Torstein's heart. He had been only 7 when Ulf the Bold had fallen, his shield splintered by enemy axes, his body returned to the village draped across his horse. Harald, his father's sworn brother, had taken in the orphaned boy, raising him alongside his own son, Sigurd. Now both Sigurd and Ulf were gone, and the bond between Torstein and Harald had worn thin as old leather. "I did what any man with honor would do," Torstein insisted, stepping closer to Eirik's kneeling form. "I saved a life. Is that not what the gods ask of us? To show courage, to protect the weak." Harald's laugh was harsh, devoid of humor. "You speak of honor? You who have not yet avenged your brother's death. You who brood in solitude while the Westfjord men who killed Sigurd still draw breath." The chieftain's words struck like physical blows, each one finding its mark in Torstein's guilt-ridden heart. The hall fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone present knew of Torstein's unfulfilled blood oath, of his promise to bring death to the Westfjord warriors responsible for Sigurd's fall. That he had not yet done so was a source of whispered speculation throughout the clan.
Before Torstein could respond, a new voice broke the silence, trembling but determined, carrying a sincerity that silenced the crowd. He saved me because he is a true warrior, Eirik said, struggling to his feet despite his bound hands. Not just strong in arm, but strong in heart. All eyes turned to the slave, astonishment clear on every face. For a thrall to speak unbidden in the chieftain's hall was unheard of, a transgression that would normally earn a swift and brutal punishment. Yet Harald made no move to silence him, perhaps too surprised by the interruption to react immediately. Eirik continued, his strange accent growing more pronounced as emotion filled his voice. I have seen many warriors, the men who raided my village, who killed my friends, who took me from my home. They were strong in battle, yes, but they were weak in spirit, cruel because they feared their own weakness. He turned slightly, addressing not just Harald, but the entire gathered clan. This man, Torstein Braço-de-Urso, showed true strength when he risked his life to save mine, a stranger, a nobody in your eyes. Is that not what makes a true hero in your songs and stories? Not just killing enemies, but protecting those who cannot protect themselves? Murmurs rippled through the crowd again, some nodding in reluctant agreement, others scowling at the slave's presumption. Harald's face remained impassive, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. You speak boldly for a thrall, the chieftain said finally, perhaps too boldly. I speak as a man, Eirik replied, drawing himself up despite his bonds. As I was born, and as I will die, whether tomorrow at your hand or years from now. You can take my freedom, but not my voice. The silence that followed was dense, like a storm cloud about to break. Harald hesitated, wounded pride in his eyes. But the truth was there, naked and raw. It wasn't just a slave's fate at stake. It was the soul of a clan. Torstein stepped forward, placing himself between Eirik and Harald. If you punish him, you must punish me first, he declared, his hand moving to the hilt of his axe in a gesture that caused the warriors around Harald to tense. I made the choice to save him, to shelter him. The responsibility is mine alone. For a long moment, Harald stared at his adopted son, something unreadable flickering in his cold blue eyes. Then, unexpectedly, the chieftain laughed, a short, sharp bark that echoed in the silent hall. By the gods, you are your father's son, after all, he said, shaking his head. Ulf was just as stubborn, just as quick to throw himself into hopeless causes. He leaned forward in his high seat, fixing Torstein with a penetrating stare. What would you have me do, bare arm? Release this slave to freedom, denying the Eastern traders their property and their profit? Have you silver to offer in his place? Torstein's mind raced. He had some wealth, arm rings of silver, a few coins, spoils from past raids, but nowhere near the 20 pieces of silver the traders demanded. Before he could speak, another voice joined the debate. I will add my wealth to Torstein's, Freya declared, stepping forward from the crowd. The shield maiden's face was resolute, her hand already removing a silver brooch from her cloak. To buy this man's freedom. Others stepped forward, Gorm the blacksmith, offering an unfinished sword blade of good steel. Leif the fisherman, presenting a strand of amber beads meant for his daughter's bride price. Even old Thora, the herb woman, hobbling forward with a small pouch of silver coins saved over many years. One by one, members of the clan added their contributions, whether out of support for Torstein, respect for Eirik's courage, or simply desire to be part of an unusual event that would be told around fires for years to come. Harald watched in astonishment as the pile of valuables grew before his high seat. When the last person had contributed, he looked from the impromptu treasure to Torstein's face, then to Eirik, still standing proud despite his bonds. "It seems," the chieftain said slowly, "that the clan has spoken." He gestured to Gunnar. "Cut his bonds." The one-eyed warrior hesitated, clearly unhappy with the turn of events. "But the Eastern traders will receive fair payment for their loss," Harald interrupted firmly, "and perhaps a lesson in the ways of the Skildson clan. We are not slave-takers by trade, Gunnar. We are warriors, farmers, craftsmen." His gaze returned to Torstein. "And occasionally, it seems, saviors of drowning men." As Gunnar reluctantly sliced through the ropes binding Eirik's wrists, a cheer went up from many in the hall. Not all faces showed approval. Some, particularly the older warriors and wealthier landowners who themselves owned thralls, frowned at this disruption of the natural order. But they kept their objections to themselves, unwilling to challenge the chieftain's decision openly. Eirik rubbed his chafed wrists, looking around in bewilderment at the clan members who had contributed to his freedom. His eyes finally settled on Torstein, gratitude and disbelief mingling in his gaze. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why would they do this for a stranger?" Torstein shook his head, equally amazed by the clan's response. "Perhaps they too are tired of death and cruelty. Perhaps your words reached them as they reached me." Harald descended from his high seat, approaching the former slave with measured steps. The hall fell silent again as the chieftain stood before Eirik, studying him with calculating eyes. "You are free," Harald declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "But freedom brings its own burdens. How will you live among us, stranger? What skills do you bring that make you worth the price these good people have paid?" Eirik straightened, meeting the chieftain's gaze without flinching. "I am a bronze worker, trained by my father. I can create buckles, brooches, arm rings, beautiful things that bring honor to their wearers and to the clan that shelters the craftsman." Harald nodded thoughtfully. "We have no bronze worker since old Finn died last summer. His workshop stands empty." He glanced at Torstein. "Your responsibility does not end with buying his freedom, Bare Arm. You vouched for this man. His actions reflect on you now." "I accept that burden gladly," Torstein replied, clasping Eirik's shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. "So be it," Harald pronounced. "Eirik the bronze worker shall have Finn's old workshop, and 3 months to prove his worth to the clan. If his work is good, he stays as a free craftsman under the protection of the Skildson name. If not—" The chieftain left the consequence unspoken, but the implication was clear. With that, Harald returned to his high seat, signaling for ale to be brought. The tension in the hall broke, conversations resuming, people gathering in small groups to discuss the unusual events they had witnessed. The Eastern traders would need to be dealt with, but that was Harald's concern now, not Torstein's. Torstein was absolved, not out of mercy, but out of respect for Eirik's courage and the weight of the choice made. The young slave gained a name, a place among free men, and the warrior a new story to carry in his heart. That night, under the starry sky and the whisper of the fjord's waters, Torstein looked into the fire and felt that the real battle was not in blades, but in the courage to change, to love, and to forgive. The silence that once consumed him was now a space for hope. The 3 months that followed brought changes to both Eirik and Torstein.
The former slave took to his new role with dedication, his skilled hands creating works of beauty that soon had clan members commissioning pieces, buckles shaped like intertwined serpents, brooches depicting Odin's ravens, arm rings decorated with intricate patterns that seemed to move in the firelight. His strange accent and foreign ways gradually became less noticeable as he adapted to life among the Skjoldsen clan. Torstein, too, was changed. The burden of shame he had carried since Sigurd's death began to lighten as he found purpose in helping Eirik establish himself in the community. He still thought of vengeance against the Westfjord men, still honored his blood oath to his brother, but the consuming rage that had threatened to devour him from within had subsided to a manageable flame. They shared Torstein's longhouse, Eirik sleeping on a new platform they had built together on the opposite side of the hearth fire. In the evenings they would talk, Torstein sharing tales of battles and voyages, Eirik describing his homeland and teaching Torstein words in his native tongue. A friendship grew between them, unexpected but strong as the oak beams that supported the roof over their heads. Spring came to the fjord, the ice retreating, new growth appearing on trees that had stood bare against winter skies. Eirik's probationary period ended with Harald formally declaring him a free member of the clan, his skills as a bronze worker having more than proven his worth. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with even those who had initially opposed his freedom raising horns of ale in his honor. As the festivities wound down, Torstein and Eirik walked together along the shore of the fjord, the spot where months before one had pulled the other from death's cold embrace. The night was clear, stars reflected in the calm water like a mirror image of the heavens above. "I never properly thanked you," Eirik said quietly, breaking the companionable silence between them, "for saving my life that day." Torstein shook his head. "There is no need. You have repaid that debt many times over with your friendship and your work for the clan." "Still," Eirik insisted, "I owe you a life. In my homeland, such a debt can never truly be repaid." Torstein considered this, watching the gentle movement of the water against the shore. "Perhaps," he said finally, "you can repay it by living well, by creating beauty where there was none before, by reminding me and others that there are things worth fighting for beyond vengeance and glory." Eirik nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind Torstein's words. "And what of your brother's killers? Will you still seek them out?" The question hung between them, as tangible as the mist rising from the fjord. Torstein had avoided speaking of his blood oath in recent months, though Eirik knew the story from others in the clan. "Yes," Torstein said after a long pause. "When the time is right, I will face them. Not for vengeance alone, but for justice. Sigurd deserves that much." He turned to face his friend, his expression solemn in the starlight. "But I will not let that quest consume me as it once did. There is more to life than death, more to strength than the ability to take lives." Eirik smiled, relief evident in his features. "That is wisdom worthy of the skald's songs, Torstein Barearm." They continued their walk, speaking of simpler things, plans for improving the bronze workshop, ideas for new designs, the trading ships that would soon arrive with the favorable spring winds. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of possibility. As they neared the village, light still burning in many dwellings despite the late hour, Torstein paused, looking out over the fjord one last time. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when I pulled you from the water that day, I thought I was saving your life. He turned to Eirik, a rare smile softening his usually stern features. "I didn't realize you would be saving mine as well." That night, between fire and ice, they understood that compassion could be the strongest weapon a Viking could wield. Not the blade that ends life, but the hand that preserves it. Not the shield that deflects harm, but the heart that embraces the stranger. Not the conquest of enemies, but the courage to defy expectation and tradition when justice demands it. In the years that followed, the tale of Torstein Barearm and Eirik the bronze worker became one of many told around hearth fires on long winter nights. A story of rescue and redemption, of friendship forged in the icy waters of the fjord, of a clan that found its conscience when confronted with a simple truth, that the measure of a warrior lies not just in the enemies he defeats, but in the lives he chooses to save. And in this way, the legacy of that cold morning, when a warrior dove into treacherous waters to grasp the arm of a drowning slave, lived on, changing not just 2 lives, but the heart of an entire people. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.